Welcome back. In previous videos in this series, we have looked at the way dates are stored in tables in Access. We learned that dates are always stored with a time component, regardless of whether you specify that time at the time you create the record or not. It's stored that way with the date and the time. We looked at some formatting we can apply to those dates with times to make them appear differently for presentation in a form or a report. You can do that for efficiency of use of the space available by shortening dates. We can use that same formatting or date functions, date logic applied to those dates to do things like sorting and filtering and linking criteria, grouping in a report, sorting in a report, filtering a query using a variable based on a date. All of those things make your reports and forms more presentable and more flexible, more usable. In this video, I'm going to concentrate on a couple of the gotchas that you might encounter, a couple of the problems that you might encounter if you don't understand all of this as well as you should or apply it correctly. I'm going to use the same database that we've been working with all along. This one again is based on my personal time and billing, and it takes records from that database and presents them in an obscured fashion so that the confidentiality of the customers and the work that I did for those customers is protected. Also, a quick reminder that my computer is set to use the standard US format of month, day, and year. If your computer settings are different, using different regional settings, you might see day, month, year instead. But keep in mind that as we go here. So let's look at a particular date range. Now, I picked this date range because I know that October of 2018 is going to illustrate both of the problems, both of the gotchas that I'm going to call out here for you today. Let's look at the report. I'm going to increase the size slightly so that it's a little more visible. And we will look at a couple of factors here. First of all, I want to point out that I added a count. This shows me that the report now returns 19 records. The intent of the report was to show work by client and month and date within that month. However, when I examine more closely, I see that this particular day, October 26th, I see 3 instances of the same work done on that day. My intent here was not to show how many times on a day I worked for a client, simply to show which clients I worked for and which projects I worked on each day. Those are 2 slightly different reports. Both are valid. I could say, well, the purpose of this report, I could modify it to show how many times I worked. I could even add the specific interval, how many minutes I worked at each of those instances. But I don't really want to do that in this report. This is simply saying how many days did I work, what projects did I work on those days. So we have this one here, which shows that problem, and this one here, which also shows the same problem. This client, I worked on the same project several times during the month, but I really only want to see that I worked on it on the 22nd, not that I worked on it 2 different times on the 22nd. So we've got 19 records based on that result. I'm going to go back into the design view and look at the query which runs this report and show you the reason for that particular problem. We have our temp vars, which include a start date and an end date, and I'm using this little function, temp vars date, to ensure that I get a valid date back from the temp var holding the start date value and the temp var holding the end date value. And we're going to look at work dates, and we are grouping by work dates. So when I run this query, you can see here's the problem right here. It shows that indeed I recorded 3 different start times for that particular project on that particular day. Now, when I saw these, and I saw 7:36:12, 7:36:15, and 7:38:21, I said to myself, that doesn't make sense. So I actually went back to my source database, the one where I actually tracked this data and looked at it. And what happened was that first one I worked for about 15 minutes, stopped, recorded the stop time, came back, worked for another 30 minutes, stopped, recorded the stop time, came back again, worked 15 more minutes. Now, I don't know if I was interrupted and had to pause, or whether I thought, well, I'm finished now, quit, then realized I had to do more work, started back up again. I don't really recall the reason for that, but they were 3 very short intervals recorded at the end of that session by adding those 3 items into the table, and the work date time reflects the fact that they were added back to back, even though they were 3 separate instances. So the question then becomes, how do I fix this problem? Because it is a problem. I only want to see one instance of working on this particular project on this particular day. It would be a different report, obviously, if I were going to record the additional information about the times, the minutes, or the hours of that work. But I only want to see the work itself, so I need to fix that. Let's remove the filter. And this particular one, where's the other one, where we had the duplicate? Oh, here it is right here. Same thing happened here. For whatever reason, I recorded 2 different intervals of time that I worked, both within a couple of minutes of each other. So what I need to do is get rid of these duplicates by taking advantage of a particular date function that I can apply that will do that for me. So I'm going to close. Not going to save it. I have set up a second query in which I have filtered I'm going to look at that particular work on that particular month. Need to do a little more adjusting to get this where I want to see it. Okay, we should be able to see it now. What I need to do is remove this time component. And I'm going to do that by using one of our built-in access date functions. The one I'm going to use is called date value. There are probably other ways to do this, and if someone says to you, well, let's do this instead of this way, that's fine, as long as you get the same result. What I'm using here is the date value function, which basically says, give me only the date component of this particular field. Forget that there's even a date, or excuse me, that there's even a time associated with it. And then the group by will now return one instance. So that fixes that for this particular one, and we can close and save it. Those of you with sharp eyes may have noticed the second date logic problem that I'm going to address here. I won't point it out right now, but I'm going to give you a few seconds here to see if you can spot the other problem on your own. Did you see it? Okay. Now, sorry. If I go back into my original query and apply that same date value function, excuse me, I should correct my problem. And yes, indeed, there it is right there. I now have 17 records. Close the using and confirm that we actually got the change. Look at the report in print preview. And now we can see that we have 2 fewer records. This particular record now shows that I worked on it on one day, or I worked on it just that day. It doesn't show how many times, but just the fact that I worked on it. And the same here. But if you'll recall, I had 3 here and 2 here. So by removing duplicates, I should have removed 2 duplicates from this row and 1 duplicate here for a total of 3 duplicates. 19 minus 3 is 16, but now I have 17. How did I end up with 17 records instead of 16? And the answer, and again, I asked those of you with sharp eyes to see if you could find it, is right here. At this point, I now have an additional date. To me, this is a far more serious problem than the duplicates, because it turns out that the original query actually hid one of the valid records that I should have seen, which is the 31st. Let's go back and see why we're seeing it now when we didn't see it before. I corrected the problem in this query in order to show you. We have the date value between temp var's start date and temp var's end date. I added these 2 fields here. And excuse me a second while I adjust this to display what I'm interested in showing you. I applied the format to the end date, and this time I'm going to reveal the hours, minutes, and seconds. And of course the same thing here with the start date, using format to reveal hours, minutes, and seconds. What this shows us is that the criteria, the temp var containing the end date criteria, actually has a time component, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds as to the start. by removing the minutes from the work date using the date value, I have revealed one additional record. And now let's go back and look at that without the date value to see why. We're focusing again on I still have my criteria involved here, so I'm going to have to take this out. And we'll put back in the work ID. There it is right there. As you can see, this particular work was recorded at 9:04 a.m., but the date criteria returned by our temp var variable indicates we want to see records that include an end date of 10/31/28, the same day, October 31st, as of midnight. 9:04:37 is after midnight, and for that reason, when we used the original version of the query, we did not get that date because it's after midnight. If I put back in again the date value, which tells me the date value, which tells me only the date on which the work was done. Now, when I compare this date to this date, it's going to be included. We'll come back, take out the work ID, put our date range back in. We see 17 records, including the one on the 31st. So, to sum up, when working with date ranges, it's really critical to be aware not just of the duplicates that you can see, but the potential for hidden values based on the fact that all dates, whether you see the time or not, include a time component. Now, by default, that would be the midnight time. If you include the time when the record was saved as part of that date, of course, it's going to show you that time in a fully displayed version. But if you format it so that you see only the date component without actually using one of the date functions, the date value function in this case, you're going to end up with errors in your reports. And again, the ones where you hide data are far more critical in my mind than those where you see duplicates, because duplicates are going to stand out at you. You may not even realize that you're missing data. With that, we have reached the end of another session. Hopefully you will have learned something new and useful to you in working with dates, formatted dates, manipulated with date logic, date used as criteria, and some of the gotchas, two of the gotchas that come about by not being thoughtful about how you handle your dates. If you like what you see, please subscribe, and I will see you next time.